Chris Dairo, KTN News, Nairobi.
Thank you, Chris, for that report. And yes, indeed, today in this country, we've entered the 22nd day with the doctors and medics strike as Kenyans continue to suffer and struggle to get the services that they need. Remember, healthcare is a right that is enshrined in the Constitution of Kenya. Kenya today is a sick country because we don't have medics to sort the problems with regards to healthcare in this country. And in studio with me to have this discussion on why it is taking so long for these issues to be resolved, who is not telling the truth, I have Kevin Osido from the County Governor's Watch. Karibu sana, Kevin. And Nuruddin Hagai, advocate of the High Court, as we continue to have this discussion. But let's just have a conversation of the story that you've seen on the new regulations on media. What's your take on that, Kevin?
The one on muzzling the media?
Yeah, yes.
Dead on arrival. I don't think the people prescribing that kind of medicine are alive to the realities of the day, particularly the constitutional expectations of access to information in Article 35, moving forward to basically describing what, for instance, surprise interview would look like. And the third thing is basically looking at who is the holder of this kind of information. And why would they consider it as a surprise, or why would they consider it as something that probably is not expected of the citizens to be aware about? So I think that if somebody was to petition this based on the premise of the Constitution, the expectations of governance, and particularly what it means insofar as access to information and what you do with that information is concerned, I don't think they are aware about the realities. And especially looking at similar kind of directives that we have had in the past, which have also helped the country insofar as making access to information and the role of media in terms of information, education, and even entertainment is concerned. So we've had successful legislations that have come in place. We have also had very strong institutions that have now been able to identify their roles and responsibilities, like CAK and many others. So insofar as this kind of a directive is concerned, I don't think it holds any water, and it is dead on arrival. Yeah.
And Hagai, now when we talk about such regulations that are in place now, these borders on the law. Now, what does the law say with regard to right to information for Kenyans?
You know, you just spoke about it. That's Article 35, access to information. The most interesting thing is that most of the regulations they're coming up with will find themselves in problems when they go to court. This is another clear victory for those who will go to court, the likes of Okia Mtata. And the government wonders why he always wins. Because of such things. You know, you ask yourself, don't they have legal officers in these offices? Don't they seek legal opinions before you draft some regulation or laws? So there are things there that they're talking about which kind of show it's more or less like infringement on media rights, which will not make sense. You know, if you ask a simple question, for example, I say no advertisement should be more than 30 minutes. So you squeeze every advertisement into 10 minutes. So that means your revenue is going to, either you're going to lose revenue. So that in itself is, you know, you have a right to actually carry business. So at the end of the day, some of those things will find themselves in tough waters, and they'll be unable to swim. It's shocking that every single day there's just some wrong policy that is being pushed. We do understand that, yes, there needs to be some regulation that is warranted, but at the same time, you should not infringe on the rights that are there. Yeah.
Now that is matters to do with right to information. But now let's talk about the doctor's strike. 22 days doctors not in hospital. Clinicians joined them on the same as well. Luckily, the nurses have said that they will continue offering services. But when we talk about right to health, or CEDO, and we know both the national and the county governments, they all have responsibilities on on offering health services to Kenyans. And when Kenyans don't get these services, I mean, from where you sit, who is not telling the truth? Because the bone of contention is the 2017 CBA. Why isn't implementing these 2017 CBA a priority?
As usual, I carried my copy of the Constitution. Article 43, 1A. So 1 says, every person has the right, A is, to the highest attainable standard of health, which includes the right to healthcare services, including reproductive healthcare. And then it goes on and on and on up to education, which is E, and all the way to housing and all that. Now, what I see happening here, Dennis, is lack of political goodwill. And this goodwill draws from history, and as you rightfully painted, from 2017 CBA. And we have a government in place which, of course, we can say took over power in 2022. But if you look at the tenets and the expectations of the CBA, and particularly how these agreements are done, there is normally that missing link, which is purely the political goodwill to be able to carry through the conversation and the commitment and the agreement until when it is alive. Now, in taking note of the expectations of the CBA is also to be alive to the fact that even when we talk about doctors, as at the time when the CBA was being done, there were doctors who were undergoing training. There were doctors who are also doing their other education, for instance, postgraduate and all that. There are doctors who are probably out of the country, undertaking other different career development progression aspects. Now, what is therefore missing is the government to realize that the CBAs are not static. They are moving with the context. And that context includes the 2017 up to the COVID, because this is also not very new to what we saw happening during the COVID, until post-COVID, when we saw doctors actually downing their tools to more than 90 days. Where was the ministry and where were the key major stakeholders insofar as the right to health and are concerned? And so if you look at what is happening, it's more or less like a push and pull mechanism. But I think I like what is happening. Despite the fact that we are losing lives and the health sector is dead, there have been very big contentions around the transfer of functions, particularly in the health sector, between national and county governments. And so what is therefore happening is the commitment from national government, because every day His Excellency the President, the Deputy President, particularly through what we call the IBEC, which brings together the national and the county governments,
yes.
and then the summit, which is chaired by His Excellency the President and the governors, there have always been commitments to be able to transfer functions fully, particularly those that are still resident at the national government. And health is one of those key functions. Now, when doctors and all the medical practitioners look at these commitments, rather these narratives, against the commitments to give life to that transfer, it is missing. And that is why, therefore, the medical, the health sector largely, particularly the stakeholders, major stakeholders, are asking themselves, where is that political goodwill? So when you say that you're going to transfer these functions, despite the reservations that still exist in the transfer, for instance, on policy issues, legislations, and even remuneration of doctors or health practitioners. And so we are looking at, can we be able to break down what are the national government functions in health and what are the county government functions in health? And when they came up with the 19 issues, I think that already gives us a very good way forward insofar as digesting who needs to do what and how it's supposed to be done.
Wakili, now here's a question where, first of all, the right to health to Kenyans is no longer there. We'd say we're operating in a situation where that right has been taken away from Kenyans. And here's a question where this 2017 CBA, you'd correct me if I'm wrong, is something that is usually deposited with the courts for implementation. Now, if there's a question where doctors are saying these ought to have been implemented back in 2017 and hasn't happened, Osido is referring to the political goodwill. Wakili, in terms of the law, who is not being forthright with the truth?
It's very clear, it's the government. Because, once you deposit the CBA in court, it's more or less like you have a case and we settle it and then you deposit a consent. That becomes the order of the court. Now, you see, it might be termed as September 2017, but court orders don't expire. Now, failure to observe the court order speaks of contempt. Now, the government of the day is telling us how the doctors are wrong to strike. And the doctors are saying, no, we are not striking, we have joined you on your strike because you are the ones who failed to uphold the court order. So this stems from the fact that, and the CBA is not just about remuneration. There are issues like 10,000 doctors to be employed in 5 years. Now, this is a government that says, yes, they're the new regime, right? At the end of the day...
It's 1 year later.
No, it's actually true. But that aside, governments operate in perpetuity. Whatever happened in that government is carried forward. That's why you hear people say, oh, your project in Uhuru. Say, no, that's the government project. So I can unveil it. I can...
supervise it.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, the CBA needs to be implemented. If they feel that CBA, they were should change it as a government, The other thing is to negotiate, and that is what the court is saying. I feel very sad where I sit as a certified professional mediator to see how things have spiraled, because I would like to know who the mediator in that process is, because he or she has failed the process. Because in mediation, there is no chest thumping. You cannot have one party feeling that they are more special than the other party. Because the issue about mediation, as the court told them to go and discuss, is so that the outcome in mediation is usually to maintain the relationship. Because the doctors need the government, and the government need the doctors. That's how they operate at the end of the day. We might have devolution, but the national government is equipped under Schedule 4 to work on health policy. Now, these doctors are under the county government, but at the end of the day, they work together. So when people say the doctors' strike is wrong, and they quote Section 43, for example, say your right to attain health care, you should read that Section 43 together with that Article 43 together with Article 41 of the Constitution, which talks about labor relations. So Article 41(1) says every person has a right to fair labor practices. 41(2) says every worker has a right to fair remuneration. And they're speaking about payment. 2B says reasonable working conditions. They are saying the state of work is deplorable. C, to join, form, or participate in a union. They are participating in their union. D says go on strike. They are on strike at the end of the day. So they are exercising their rights as well. That is Article 41. And it goes further and says every trade union or employers organization and employer has the right to engage in collective bargaining. Hence the CBA. So at the end of the day, it boils down to what he says, political goodwill. The easiest thing to do here is, for example, if you say you don't have money, which is funny, because I believe this should be budgeted every year. Because, every year there are medical interns and not students. They call them students. That's another problem, because they feel belittled. These are people who have graduated at the end of the day. So they are medical interns. You should be able to budget this in every budget. So my question is, next year, we're going to have the same problem, because this budget, clearly, they didn't have plans of budgeting for that. Or if it is budgeted, where does that money go to? That's the biggest question.
Kevin, now, he's brought in something that is very significant. The need for people to engage in a roundtable, consensus, give and take, just negotiating in these. And we've had statements, Nairobi governor, we shall fire you if you don't go back to work. The CS as well, you will be fired. And here's a question when you come to negotiating in terms of even doctors themselves willing to come on the table and have this discussion, that doesn't seem to be bearing any fruit, so to say. Yeah. And in terms of, at the end of the day, we know that is what is needed. These people have to agree on something at the end of the day. What needs to happen? How should both the government and doctors relook this entire conversation so that Kenyans don't continue suffering in these hospitals?
Dennis, what is required is, one, is political goodwill. And I'll keep insisting this before I probably go into the commitment of the various parties. Why political goodwill is because Kenya Kwanza government promised Kenyans health, right to health. And they went further and spoke about its access. They went further and spoke about its financing. And every day we are seeing them talking about community health promoters. These are people who don't work in a vacuum. Even those community health promoters contribute to the work that is being done by trained medical personnel. Now, these are conversations that needs to go in the entire framework of government. So that, for instance, the same amount of energy that is put on affordable housing, where the president himself in person stands on not tall buildings, but vehicles, and says, "Hii lazima work, it has to work." We need to see His Excellency the President exercising the same interest and leadership, because this purely is what I would call leadership in crisis and crisis in leadership. So from the side of the medical practitioners, it is actually crisis in leadership, because they're in a crisis and they're looking for a leader who will be able to engage insofar as what government has to be able to ensure that the CBAs and all these processes are going on. From the side of the government, there is no leader. So there is leadership in crisis. There is nobody who wants to take ownership other than the CS and, of course, the head of public service and who I think is the chief mediator in this process, which is already conflict of interest, because for mediation you need a pure non-partisan individual. The head of public service is actually a senior government officer. And so that political goodwill is purely missing. We don't see the same effort against the everyday business of government. For example, now the president chairing a meeting to agree on UDA elections. Why is it not possible for His Excellency the President to sit with the parties and say, hata mimi nataka kuwapatia my 20 minutes. I want to listen to these issues. Cabinet Waziri wa Afya, what is the issue? KMPDU and your stakeholders, what is the issue? What do you think we need to? Because I'm sure that the President is being adequately briefed. But why don't we see his interest in this issue that is really costing the lives of Kenyans? The second issue is the lack of what I would call a BATNA, a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And this has to go beyond what we see happening as news stories. We want to see people having tea together, the CS, the SecGen of KMPDU, and all these others, beyond the press statements. Because what we are seeing happening is you issue yours, I issue mine. Why don't we see conversations that rally on a joint statement that therefore addresses key concerns? For instance, I liked how they were able to agree on the 19 issues that I spoke about, so that we know from the national government, the Minister of Health, this is your obligation and your responsibility. And we saw yesterday that the chief, the Bwana Felix Koskei, actually issued a statement about the 3 concerns, which included payment to some of the medical interns. It included the fact that they also expect letters for posting it to the counties and all that. But then when you look at the statement from KMPDU, they are saying we were not consulted and that we are not going to pick those letters, which apparently they are supposed to pick from, is it today or tomorrow? Now, that already is a conflict scenario. Why is it not possible for the drafters of these letters and the signatories, before they sign and release them to citizens through the press, to actually just call each other and say, kuja usome hii statement yetu before we release it? Do you think it's something that we can agree on? Because that way, in my view, we will already be moving towards a positive progress. Because remember, as this back and forth is happening, it is Kenyans who are losing their lives. So I don't see that commitment to, especially from government, to be able to address these concerns. And if you move it, even stretch it further, you ask yourself, how come they were able to get 2.4 billion out of the 4.8 billion that is expected? Where did that money come from? And how come it has not been available in the past until after all these days that doctors are striking? So that goodwill to be able to ensure that things are going on effectively, because beyond this conversation that we are having, there are also issues about financing of medical health, or rather financing of health, both for public and even private institutions. Because I also saw somewhere that private institutions are also threatening over government engagements like the e-teams, and now the invoicing has to be done digitally. So the lack of effective participation, what sometimes we call public participation, the lack of effective participation of key stakeholders in decisions that government is making is also one other factor that is aggravating all these efforts to be able to deal with the crisis that we have.
Yeah. And Kevin, well, let's take this short commercial break. But when you come, I want us to look at, you say you are a certified mediator. What is missing in all this mediation process? Let's take this short commercial break. We shall be back with much more.